Welcome to our presentation on Latinos and Intersectionality by Abigail Mulhern, Ebone Roberts, and Reda. To begin, it is important to understand what intersectionality is. The term is usually credited to Kimberly Crenshaw and describes the interplay between overlapping and potentially conflicting identities. It acknowledges that identities or social categories should not be viewed on their own, but in interconnected and mutually reinforcing components that interact with each other within the system of oppression in the United States. According to Ashley Hannah Daftery, the concept of intersectionality is crucial to understanding how factors continuously affect the lives of Latinos in the United States. When examining the intersectional components that affect those of Latino ethnicity, it is important to understand what factors are in play, such as race, class, gender, and education. According to Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney's piece, The Economic State of the Latino Community in America, there are roughly 60 million Latinos living in the United States. This accounts for 18% of the population. Latinos are the second largest ethno-racial group in our country. There are many disparities between Latino households and white households in America. Hispanic or Latino households are 1.7 times more likely to live in poverty. Young Latinos are half as likely as whites to graduate from college, and the median income is nearly $20,000 less per year than the median white household income. Latinos are more likely to find jobs within the labor force, which plays a large part in American economy, but because they work in lower-paying occupations, they earn less. This translates to lower median income and less chances of them being able to own homes. Given their higher rates of unemployment and lower earnings, Latino families are among the most likely to be in poverty. Hispanic children are more than twice as likely as white children to be raised in a low-income household. Latino children experience less upward mobility than white children and are more downwardly mobile than white children. When looking at women within the workforce, even when accounting for factors like occupation and education, Latino women experience a large pay gap. A Latina in a management position makes 58% of what a white man makes in a management position. Now that we understand more about the factors affecting Latino communities, let's examine how intersectionality affects the Latino population in the contexts of personality development, values, and tolerance. The American Psychological Association defines personality as the individual differences in characteristic patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. When studying personality, one would look at a person's individual differences, such as characteristics or mannerisms, and how the various parts of a person come together as a whole. There are many theories on how people develop traits, characteristics, and personality, though there is no singular answer. Most commonly, theories talk about childhood experiences, environment, and genetics. The life experiences we have can have a large impact on how our personalities and identities are formed and continue to be shaped as we age. Flores-Gonzalez, Aranda, and Vaquera write in their piece titled Doing Race that Latinos are labeled as a pan-ethnic group. They can have origins in Mexico, Puerto Rico, or Guatemala, just to name a few. The authors describe how many young Latinos have a difficult time understanding how to identify themselves racially within America. Hispanic or Latino is not considered a race, it is deemed an ethnicity, and Latinos are legally considered white, yet they are often socially considered a minority group. The authors go on to talk about how Latinos answer the questions about race on the U.S. Census. Many Latinos mark more than one race, some leave the race portion completely blank, and others attempt to identify themselves as white or black. Current racial categories do not reflect the way that many of those within this ethnic group feel they identify. At the end of their piece, Flores-Gonzalez, Aranda, and Vaquera consider the implications of their research, stating that our society devalues the identities of Latino youths and imposes racial identities upon them that they may not embrace or feel to be true. This piece demonstrates how hard it can be for young Latinos in our country to understand how to identify themselves socially and legally. Personal identity is a large part of one's personality as a whole and can impact how those of this ethnicity perceive themselves and understand their place as members of society. Intersectionality is an important concept to use when looking at how those of the Latino culture see the world and interact within society. The overlapping disparities are responsible for keeping Latinos from jobs, wealth, good education, and a true sense of belonging in our country. This can have a huge impact on their personality development and well-being, as well as their overall sense of identity.
So first, we'll quickly discuss American values, then we'll discuss Latino values, and then we'll discuss the intersectionality of these values. So first, from USA Hello, what are American values and what is important to Americans? We discuss independence, which is being able to handle things on your own. Next is privacy. This is being able to disclose what you want to disclose and with whom you want to disclose it to. Then we have directness. Basically, this is telling it how it is. Then we have equality. This is simply an idea of equality. Next is competition. We view competition as a motivator, helps us work harder. Next is work ethic. We value work ethic. We work really hard, very diligent when it comes to working. And lastly is consumerism. We're very materialistic. We work really hard so that we can have the best and the newest things. So now we'll discuss Latino values. I'm looking at the CDC cultural insights, communicating with Hispanics and Latinos. First, we'll discuss collectivism. This is basically how Latinos largely function from group activities. They share responsibility, accountability. They prefer being able to get along in a group rather than doing things isolated or alone. Next, you have respect and diplomacy for elders. This is taught from a very young age. Juckett 2013 explains that children are taught to show kindness and modesty when speaking to elders, and courteous communication is upheld when speaking to anyone that's older than you. Also, when maintaining eye contact for Latinos, this can be perceived as challenging or intimidating for some. Machismo. This is an exaggerated sense of male pride. Luquise 2019 explains that this is taught to boys at a very young age. They teach them to be strong, they have to be tough. The word macho actually comes from the word machismo. So they have to start out being very macho, and that leads up to them being a man, a macho man. Typically, the father or the oldest male relative is responsible for that. And typically, the father or the oldest male relative is the most authoritative figure. Women are taught that they have to be submissive and accommodating to the men, and this is taught to the girls as well. Familismo, family first. They have a strong sense of loyalty to their family. They'll put the family above themselves, even their own comfort. One example of this is how Latinos will often live in large household sizes. It's common to see multi-generational families or multi-family homes living together for Latinos. Next is faith and church. This is another important concept for Latinos. Many of them believe in God, and majority of them are Catholic. Church is a big role for family and for Latinos. They typically attend church services together. They typically have some type of symbolic religious piece in their home, as well as they pray daily together. Then we have work ethic. Latinos typically have a very strong work ethic. According to the Washington Times, this is fueled by their commitment to their family rather than by consumerism. The problem is that Latinos often work in really low paying jobs, and they often don't have access to health care. They're not offered insurance at these jobs. And then lastly, you have folk medicine and home remedies. Some Latinos still use home remedies or folk medicine that's passed down from older relatives. Many Latinos, like I just stated, they don't have insurance and they don't really trust Western medicine or our practices. And often they'll listen to their family, they'll listen to their friends, they'll do other things other than going to seek medical attention, and often will wait until the last minute to seek medical attention and end up in the emergency room. One article that I read in the New York Times showed that first generation Latinos are actually more healthy than second generation Latinos, whereas second generation Latinos typically grow up here in the United States. They make more money, they have more access to healthcare, but they're actually not as healthy as the first generation Latinos. So I thought that was interesting. So the intersectionality of values. First, we have machismo and male authority. So the excessive masculinity, and you intersect that with the male authority and the fact that women are taught to be submissive and yielding. This sets the stage for abuse to occur to those women. Mental abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. One study showed that 1 in 3 Latina women have been victims of domestic violence at some point in their life, and that was from Esperanza 2016. Next, we have directness and diplomacy. Many Americans are very brutally honest and direct. We don't beat around the bush. We'll look you straight in the face and state whatever it is that we have to say. May not always be something negative, but that's just how we communicate. And when this is done for Latinos, they may perceive this in a different way than the way that we intended it. Direct eye contact may be misconstrued as a challenge or as an intimidation tactic. The frankness that we use may be seen as disrespectful or rude. According to Oakley, Lopez, Savalas, and Harvey, 50% of Latinos report being discriminated against based on race in the United States. So no wonder our directness can feel like another blow to them. Next, we have home remedies and feminismo. This is another area where values intersect to progressively oppress the Latino population. Latinos often use home remedies, prayer, advice of family and friends before they'll seek medical advice. And you couple this with living in a large household, especially with contagious illnesses. I'll use, for example, COVID that we're dealing with right now. The CDC in the New York Times reported that 33% of Americans testing positive for coronavirus in June 2020 were Latinos. Equality and work ethic. So, unfortunately for Latinos, they do not have an equal chance as most Americans when it comes to the workforce. Despite being dependable workers, many Latinos make considerably less than their white peers. Studies show that Latino women make less simply based on gender and race, and that's from Market Watch. They also suggest that full-time college-educated Hispanic workers deal with more discrimination than employees that simply have a high school education. So more needs to be done in that aspect as well.
We will now look into how intersectionality impacts the tolerance of the Latino community in the United States. In terms of tolerance, we will look into how generational differences, cultural identity, and race presentation impact tolerance within Latino communities in the United States. And we will also look into how other groups view the Latino community in the United States. Tolerance is starting to vary across generations in Latino communities. How one identifies as Latino varies from generation to generation. According to Pew Research, foreign-born Latinos most identify themselves by the country they were born in. Second-generation Latinos define themselves equally as either by their country of heritage or Latino. Third-generation Latinos are split equally as identifying as either by their country of origin, Latino, or American. As generations change the way they identify, this can change how those in the Latino community tolerate each other. According to Pew Research, few Hispanics report a strong sense of connectedness with other Hispanics, with only 18% saying that what happens to other Hispanics in the U.S. impacts them a lot, and another 40% saying what happens to other Hispanics in the U.S. impacts them just some. Across each generation, though, all agreed that speaking Spanish was the most important part of the Latino identity, followed by having parents of Latino descent or heritage. This could lead to disparities amongst Latino communities. Spanish speaking is dubbed as this important quality of being Latino, but increasing the amount of third-generation higher Latinos in the United States cannot speak Spanish. We'll look more into this when we discuss the tolerance of Latinos by other groups in the United States. Race presentation also impacts how Latinos are tolerant of each other in the community. Let's look at white-presenting versus black-presenting Latinos. Afro-Latinos face even more hardships due to the color of their skin. They are first identified by their color of skin rather than as Latino. It is difficult for many Afro-Latinos to come to terms with their race and ethnicity. According to Pew Research, only 18% of Afro-Latinos identify as Black, 39% identify as white, and 24% identified as Hispanic, which we know is not classified as a race. Now, in newer research, they have added the category of some other race, so one would wonder how those statistics might shift. Anti-Black racism is common amongst Latinos. This is perpetuated by the incentives of white-presenting Latinos into society and them being able to reap the benefits of white privilege. In an NBC News article, Latino Life, Are We Tolerant of Our Own Hispanic Diversity?, the article explores the difficulties some Latinos face to fit into their communities. Myrna Martinez is a woman from Honduras. She identifies racially as Black but ethnically Latina. And she talks about how she is not always accepted in the Latino society. She gives an example of going into a Latino hair salon and the workers making snide remarks about her hair in Spanish, and her correcting them in Spanish, and them being so shocked that she could speak Spanish. She also talks about how her mother used to love watching telenovelas, but she points out that all the Black characters on the show are stereotypes, voodoo priestesses and maids. And then we have Julie Rodriguez. She discusses her difficulties being white-presenting Latino. She cannot speak Spanish, so she's often embarrassed when she's put into situations where most people speak Spanish, on the Spanish side of her family. But then on her other side of the family, she feels she doesn't quite fit as well. So it's important for Latinos to recognize they are a pan-ethnic group that encompasses a diverse population. The United States is quote-unquote a melting pot, full of people from different cultures. In an ideal world, the general population would work to embrace and celebrate different cultures. That's not generally the case in the United States. There has been a long history of intolerance towards different races and ethnicities. When minorities are tolerated in society, many times they're just that, tolerated, not embraced, not celebrated. Many are told to assimilate to the quote-unquote American culture. This sentiment is common towards the Latino population, especially in the past decade, where there has been a rise of anti-Latino hate crimes and sentiments. The FBI defines hate crimes as crimes motivated by bias based on a person's race, religion, or sexual orientation, among other categories. According to FBI reports, as of 2019, hate crimes against Latinos have been at an overall high for the past 11 years. There was an 8.7% increase from 2018 to 2019 in hate crimes. In 2019, 23 people were killed by a gunman in El Paso, Texas. The attack was targeting Latinos. The gunman felt that, quote, Mexican immigrants were invading the United States. The stereotype of undocumented Mexican immigrants grew more prevalent in the past few years, as many politicians have been using immigration and the demonization of immigrants as campaign platforms. There's persistent stereotype that all Latino immigrants are here undocumented from Mexico, and this is just not the case. Let's look at some statistics about the Latino population in the United States. Please note that all these stats are pulled from Pew Research, and I realize that some of these stats are being repeated, but I think it is important to reiterate these numbers. Latinos are the second fastest growing racial or ethnic group in the United States. Of the 60.6 million Latinos in the United States, in 2019, only a third of them were immigrants. The second third were second generation, and the remaining third were third generation or higher, meaning they were U.S. born to U.S. born parents. 4 in 5 Latinos are U.S. citizens, which is around 80%. The number of new immigrant Latinos is on the decline, while U.S.-born Latinos are on the rise. So much of this negative rhetoric is not accurate and more so based on racism and xenophobia. These biased mindsets have caused many Latinos to assimilate to American values, which can take a negative toll on mental health. There has been an increase in suicide and mental health disorders as more Latino population assimilates. But to counterpoint that, some research has shown that Latino youth that embrace their culture and bilingual and have biculturalism do better academically and have better mental health because they are able to maximize the ability to find and utilize resources and are better adaptive to situations. Now let's look at language. As discussed earlier, speaking Spanish is a key point of identifying as Latino. But we saw that numbers that the higher generations are speaking Spanish less. This definitely correlates with the push to assimilate. Even though the United States has no official language, 30 states have English listed as their official language. And there are numerous stereotypes and biases against those who do not speak English or speak with an accent. So there is even more added pressure for the younger Latino population to assimilate. According to the Minority Rights Group International, the loss of cultural practices in Latino community have major negative impacts on the community, including diminished life expectancy. Quote, while recently arrived Latino immigrants live on average 3 years longer than white Americans and 6 years more than African Americans, despite experiencing nearly double the poverty rates of the native-born population, this gap is seen to decrease among later generations of Latinos. The decrease is thought to coincide with the transition from traditional foods to highly processed foods. And also, we need to know that practicing cultural traditions is how many Latino families and communities stay connected and maintain their support systems. So maintaining their culture is important for their health, mentally and physically. In the case of Latinos in the United States, assimilation rather than acceptance of Latino culture is negatively impacting that community. I know this is just skimming over the surface of the issue of tolerance in the United States. If you are interested in bringing forth positive change for the Latino community, there is a link on this slide to Every Action website that has 11 nonprofits that work with Latino communities in various settings. This concludes our presentation. We hope this provided some insight into the intersectionality and diverse experiences of Latinos in the United States. Thank you for taking the time to listen.